Little is known about the young Eleanor Gwyn, as records about her are scarce from that time. She was born a commoner, probably in or around Covent Garden, London, where her mother ran a brothel. Samuel Pepys recounted a story in which Nell told the people that I was brought up in a bawdy house to fill strong waters to the guests, though it is very likely that she also worked as a prostitute there. Her renowned quick wits, gift of the gab, and feisty personality could well have formed in these early years working in such an environment, and they were to stand her in good stead as the low-born, perky Cockney mistress of King Charles II, who came from nothing and rose to be a famous actress and royal concubine. Nell was employed as an orange girl at the King's Theatre, London, in 1663. Orange girls were young women, often just girls, who sold fruit, candied pails, and other sweet treats to the theatregoers during performances. They were also tasked with running messages from men in the audience to the actresses backstage or between people in the crowd, usually to arrange sexual encounters. The orange girls themselves may also have been expected to provide occasional sexual services to earn extra money. Whether this activity rose to the level of pimping may be a matter of semantics. Over the next year or so, she began taking bit parts in shows and was quickly noticed as a rising star in the world of Restoration theatre. This was the first time ever that women were allowed to perform on stage, and Nell's talent for comedy, good looks, and lively persona embodied the new and exciting world of the Restoration. By 1665, she was a well-known and established actress, admired by people from all walks of life, who came to see her in the popular comedic roles that made her one of the most famous celebrities of her day. Nell's talent for acting wasn't the only skill that helped her up the social ladder. From a young age, she took a succession of lovers, each more rich and famous than the last. In 1667, she left London and the stage to begin an affair with Charles Sackville, Earl of Dorset, after he promised her £100 a year for her position. It was not to last, and by that winter, she had returned to London and her acting career. Charles was enamoured with Moll Davis, a fellow actress, but on Nell's return to London at the end of 1667, the Duke of Buckingham saw an opportunity to dangle another mistress under the king's nose. Negotiations began. Nell suggested that she would need £500 per year to be kept as the king's mistress, but this was rejected as too expensive, and so as quickly as the negotiations began, they were over. One afternoon, Nell was attending the theatre, and by chance the king and his brother James, Duke of York, were sitting close by. After flirting with her throughout the entire performance, Charles invited Nell to supper at a nearby tavern. It is said that Nell's charm, sense of humour and honest, down-to-earth personality won Charles over. The king, after supper, discovered that he had no money on him, nor did his brother, and Nell had to foot the bill. "Odd's fish," she exclaimed in an imitation of the king's manner of speaking, "but this is the poorest company I ever was in." In January 1668, Samuel Pepys heard a rumour from another actress that the king did send several times for Nellie and she was with him, which suggests that by then they had come to an agreement of their own. Having previously been the mistress of Charles Hart and Charles Sackville, she jokingly called the king her Charles III, although she was already receiving gifts of money for her services to the king. Nell continued acting, likely because at this early stage of her relationship with the king, her position and her livelihood were not yet secured. But her notoriety as a royal concubine and celebrated comedian drew large crowds, encouraging playwrights to create roles and plays specifically for her, securing at least her own crown as the Restoration actress, making her well paid and in high demand. But in 1669, Nell became pregnant with her first child with the king and quit the theatre. The king moved her into a house in Lincoln's Inn Fields, where their son, also named Charles, was born. In December 1670, she returned to acting, indicating that, even as the mother to the king's child, she simply could not afford not to work. Within 2 months, the king, probably embarrassed that a mistress of his should have to take employment, persuaded her to retire by buying her a grand house on the fashionable west end of Pall Mall, just across St James's Park from Whitehall, as well as a pension to secure her place as royal mistress. Here they enjoyed a blissful, almost domestic life together on the occasions when Charles wanted to withdraw from the demands of court and his other high-maintenance mistresses to spend time at Nell's house. For a couple of years, Nell was Charles's favourite bedfellow. On Christmas Day 1671, she gave birth to their second son, James. Her rivalry with fellow actress Moll was already strong on and off the stage. The girls were to be continually pitted against each other, both as actresses in different theatre companies and as rivals for the king's attention, as they were both introduced to him at around the same time. At the beginning of her stay at court, Nell, knowing that Moll was due to see the king, invited her round for afternoon tea, laced with laxatives. However, when Louise de Carouel arrived at court in 1670, it was clear that Charles was smitten. By the following year, Nell had been eclipsed by Louise as Charles's favourite. The two women would have an ongoing rivalry, no less because they were different in every way imaginable. Nell would torment the high-born and sensitive Louise, using her sharp tongue and quick wit. While Nell went untitled, Louise was ennobled as the Duchess of Portsmouth. When Louise slyly remarked that Nell looked fine enough in her dress to be a queen, Nell retorted with, "You are entirely right, madam, and I am whore enough to be a duchess." Louise and Nell did eventually become friends, often meeting for tea and cards or attending each other's parties. But Nell was resilient and feisty and was often exasperated by Louise, who was prone to outbursts of crying and despair, so much so that she called her the Weeping Willow. Nell had already secured herself in the king's affections and would stay there for the rest of her life. In comparison to his other favourites, she was faithful to the king, was not as greedy with money, rarely meddled in politics, and he was always happy and relaxed in her company. Unlike Charles's other mistresses, Nell came from a humble social background without a title, family connections or wealth. At court and with the public, this worked both for her and against her. Many turned their noses up at such a low-born woman invading their aristocratic space. But as Charles's court had become increasingly filled with libertines and young and upcoming courtiers, Nell was welcomed by many who saw her vivacious and fun personality as an exciting addition. She kept a fun circle of actors, musicians, poets and playwrights, often entertaining her at Pall Mall House, where Charles would be in regular attendance. More than anything, Charles, who loved to be amused by comedy, satire, pranks and jokes, usually at the expense of others, must have been delighted by Nell's cheeky and playful tendencies. When a courtier chose to ride around in a coach and 8 horses as a show of wealth and status, Nell later paraded herself through London by a coach pulled by 8 oxen. She fared even better with the public and was by far the most popular of Charles's mistresses. She was already well known through her acting career and her roots as a low-born girl who had risen through the ranks as a result of her own effort. Unlike the snobby aristocratic mistresses, meant that she had the common touch that the people admired. When travelling in a coach, Nell was mobbed by a crowd who thought she was Louise. "Pray, good people, be silent," Nell said, sticking her head out of the carriage window. "I am the Protestant whore. I am English through and through." Louise was French and loathed even more for it because of the Francophobia that had permeated England at this time. Unfortunately for Nell, she never received a title, though it is not recorded that she ever pushed for one. She had accumulated wealth enough over the years, several properties, small lands of her own, pensions that grew to over £5,000 a year by 1676, and a great amount of finery such as furniture, clothes and jewellery. Her sons were a different matter. She wanted to secure their future in the aristocracy. The king made Charles Earl of Beaufort, and his younger brother James was given the title of Lord Beauclerk. There are 2 stories about how the elder of her 2 children, Charles, was given the earldom of Beaufort. The first is that Charles was 6 years old. On the arrival of the king, Nell said, "Come here, you little bastard, and say hello to your father." When the king protested about her calling him that, she replied, "Your Majesty has given me no other name by which to call him." In response, Charles created him Earl of Beaufort. The other story is that Nell grabbed young Charles and hung him out of the window and threatened to drop him unless he was granted peerage. The king cried out, "God save the Earl of Beaufort," and subsequently officially created the peerage, saving his son's life. No one can attest for the second story, but there are said to be witnesses to the first. Nell and her son Charles, her younger son James, had died in 1680, further established their place in the English aristocracy in 1684, shortly before the king's death. Charles was created the Duke of St Albans, issued an additional allowance of £1,000 per year, and granted the offices of Chief Ranger of Enfield Chase and Master of the Hawks. On his deathbed, Charles famously asked his brother to let not poor Nelly starve. Honouring his brother's wishes, James, now King of England, ensured that Nell and her son were well looked after. Nell was the king's only mistress who truly loved the countryside, and she was a fan of falconry. Some even believe that the king had finally planned to give her a title of the Countess of Greenwich, but he had fallen ill and died the following year. Heartbroken now without her biggest supporter, Nell withdrew from court, preferring to entertain at home with friends and family. She herself fell ill in 1686, some believe succumbing to syphilis that she may have contracted years earlier, which resulted in 2 strokes in 1687. The first left her paralysed on her left side, and the second confined her to bed for several months. She passed away in November of that year, just 3 years after Charles II. Nell was only 37 years old when she died, but what she achieved in such a short life was nothing less than extraordinary. She had pulled herself from the slums of London, becoming a famous actress, endeared herself to people from all ranks and walks of life, successfully installed herself as a favourite mistress of the king, and secured wealth, titles and property for her child. She was buried in the Church of St Martin in the Fields, London, on the 17th of November 1687, in compliance with one of her funeral requests. Thomas Tennyson, the future Archbishop of Canterbury, preached a sermon on the 17th of December from the text of Luke 15:7. Just so, I tell you, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who need no repentance. Though she didn't live to meet them, she had 12 grandchildren through her son Charles and his wife Diana, a court beauty and wealthy heiress. The title of Duke of St Albans is still in use today, having been passed down through his male bloodline. And this concludes the video. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this, please click the like button, give it a thumbs up, and please subscribe for future videos. Thank you.